It started with a knock I didn't expect. A slow, heavy knock, the kind that makes your stomach tighten before you even open the door. On my front porch stood a man I barely knew, but his expression told me everything. This wasn't going to be a neighborly chat. His eyes darted past me, scanning my yard, my siding, even the position of my mailbox, like he was mentally taking notes. Then came the words that made my coffee taste bitter for the rest of the day. "You're not part of the HOA yet." The yet hung in the air like a storm cloud. We'd lived here for 6 years, enjoying the freedom most people in this subdivision could only dream about. No petty violation letters. No fees. No strangers measuring our grass. Just peace. But apparently that peace had become a target. Not because we'd done anything wrong, but because we weren't stuck in the same trap as everyone else. I wish I could tell you this was just about a grumpy old man trying to stir up trouble. But this was bigger than him. This was about control. About people so used to living under misery, they couldn't stand to see anyone escape it. The funny thing? This man hated the HOA with every fiber of his being, complained about it daily on Facebook, yet here he was, fighting to drag us in with him. It was like watching someone try to sink your boat while yelling about how much they hate drowning. And if you think this is just harmless neighbor drama, you haven't met someone like him. People like this don't stop at words. They don't stop until they've reshaped your life into the image of their own frustration. And soon I learned he wasn't the only one. That knock on my door was just the first crack in the wall. The real storm was still forming, one that would turn our quiet little corner of the neighborhood into the front line of a war we never signed up for. When we bought this house 6 years ago, it felt like we'd stumbled onto a secret. The open house was sunny, the street was quiet, and the biggest selling point came from 3 little words printed right there on the listing. No HOA. For me, that wasn't just a perk, it was a victory. I'd heard the horror stories. People fined for a flower pot in the wrong color. Forced to paint their homes the approved beige, just to keep the neighborhood's aesthetic. I wanted no part of it. So we signed the papers. We unpacked boxes. We built a life. And for the first few months I would smile every time I drove past the rest of the neighborhood, knowing we had dodged that bullet. Then one afternoon, I overheard a conversation that made my stomach twist. Someone mentioned the HOA in passing, like it was a given, like it was just part of life here. I thought they must have been talking about some other subdivision nearby. But no, they meant ours. That's when we learned the truth. There was an HOA. It just didn't apply to us. The builder who put up our little row of houses had backed out before the association formed, leaving us, a small odd handful of homeowners, outside its reach. No dues. No restrictions. No board breathing down our necks. It should have been a blessing. And for a while it was. But the longer we lived here, the more I noticed it. The looks, the comments, the tiny flickers of envy. We were free and they weren't. And some people, well, they can't stand to see anyone else escape a cage they've made peace with. Our houses became the other side of the neighborhood, not officially but socially. At block parties there were questions that weren't really questions. "Oh, so, you don't have to pay dues? Must be nice. You don't have to get approval for your landscaping? Interesting." Every sentence was dipped in a little bit of bitterness. Still, it was just harmless tension, until the Facebook posts started. First, they were vague complaints about people who think they're above the rules. Then one day my neighbor sent me a screenshot that made my heart race. There he was, the same old man who would soon show up at my door, typing in all caps. "It's time to make everyone a member. No exceptions." And that's when I realized, this wasn't going to stay online for long. At first I tried to laugh it off. People post all kinds of nonsense online, sometimes just to see if they can get a reaction. But with him it was different. He wasn't venting, he was building something. Every few days a new post would pop up. Each one more pointed, more demanding. He started tagging other homeowners, looping them into his cause like a fisherman reeling in a net. It wasn't just about the HOA anymore. He started talking about fairness, about everyone contributing equally, about how special treatment was dividing the neighborhood. His words dripped with that false sense of righteousness people use when they're really just jealous. The first time he confronted me in person was at the community park. I was walking my dog, minding my own business, when I heard his voice behind me. "You're one of the exemptions, aren't you?" I turned, and there he was, that same look of appraisal in his eyes, the one that made you feel like you were being weighed and measured. I told him yes, and that it was just how the contracts were written. His lips curled like I'd just confessed to a crime. "Contracts can change," he said, his tone flat and certain, like he was talking about the weather. From that moment, the energy shifted. It wasn't just some old guy griping anymore, it was a mission. He started showing up at HOA meetings with printouts of bylaws and petitions. He cornered board members in the parking lot. And when they didn't seem eager to join his crusade, he went back to Facebook, whipping up anyone who'd listen. Rumors started. People said we were freeloaders, who were ruining the neighborhood spirit. They claimed our homes were bringing down property values because we weren't held to the same standards. None of it was true, but when has that ever stopped gossip? Then one night I saw it. His post wasn't just words anymore, it was a plan. He'd scheduled an informal meeting at his house, inviting anyone concerned about the unfair HOA exemptions to attend. The date was circled in red on the screenshot my neighbor sent me. I stared at it for a long time, wondering how many of our so-called neighbors would show up. Wondering if this was the night our quiet little group of free homeowners would become targets in a war we never started. What I didn't know then was that the meeting wouldn't just be about us joining the HOA. It would be about something far bigger and far more dangerous than I ever imagined. The days leading up to the meeting felt like living under a microscope. People I'd waved to for years suddenly seemed different. Some avoided eye contact, rushing past my driveway like I wasn't there. Others lingered just a little too long, as if sizing me up before deciding whether to say hello. A few of the other exempt homeowners stopped by to talk. One was furious. "We can't let him push us around," she said, pacing my porch like a caged animal. Another just looked tired. "Maybe we should just join. Pay the dues, follow the rules, and avoid the headache." I understood her exhaustion, but the thought of giving in made my stomach twist. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. Meanwhile, the old man's Facebook posts grew sharper. He started using phrases like taking back control and protecting our community. It was laughable and unsettling at the same time, the kind of language that sounded noble until you realized it was aimed like a weapon. My husband suggested we skip the meeting altogether. "Why walk into a room full of people who've already made up their minds?" he asked. But something in me refused to stay home. I wanted to hear what was being said, and more importantly, who was saying it. The night of the meeting, I parked a few houses away, just to see who else would show up. The street was lined with cars. Porch lights glowed like spotlights on the crowd gathering inside his living room. Some faces were familiar, others were from the far side of the neighborhood, people who had no real stake in this but seemed eager for the drama. As I stepped through the front door, the noise hit me, not the friendly hum of neighbors chatting, but the sharp, clipped tones of people who'd already chosen a side. At the center of it all stood the old man, his voice steady, his posture commanding. He held a folder thick with papers, and the way people leaned and told me this wasn't going to be a casual discussion. It felt less like a neighborhood gathering, and more like the opening move in a takeover. And then I saw what was on the top page of his stack. Something that made my chest tighten and my pulse quicken. It wasn't just a petition to make us join the HOA. It was a plan to change the neighborhood's bylaws entirely, in ways that would affect everyone, exempt or not. The room quieted as he began to speak, his voice carrying the practiced rhythm of someone who'd been rehearsing this moment for weeks. He didn't start with our exemptions. He started with fear. "Property values are at risk," he said, scanning the room as if he were the only one holding back the tide. "We've worked too hard to let a few people jeopardize everything." Heads nodded. People shifted uncomfortably, the weight of his words settling over them. He talked about weeds and lawns, mismatched paint colors, and the need for uniformity. Subtle jabs aimed directly at us, even though we'd kept our homes just as neat as anyone else's. Then he moved in for the strike. "There's a loophole," he said, holding up the thick folder like it was the Holy Grail. "It's been exploited for too long. But with enough signatures we can amend our bylaws, close that loophole, and finally make this neighborhood whole." He wasn't talking about unity. He was talking about control. His plan wasn't just to drag our handful of homes into the HOA, it was to rewrite the rules so anyone who moved into our houses in the future would have no choice but to join. I glanced around the room. Some people looked skeptical, but others were leaning forward, hungry for it. And then I spotted a few faces I didn't expect. Board members. The same ones who'd once told me it wasn't possible to force us in. Now they were here, listening. Questions started. Not about whether this was fair, but about how quickly it could be done. The old man answered each one like a general mapping out a battle. And when someone asked if this might lead to legal trouble, he smiled, not the warm kind, but the kind that makes your skin crawl. Sometimes, he said, a little legal trouble is worth it for the greater good. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't going to stop with a few signatures or an online spat. This man was willing to burn the whole neighborhood down to get his way. And judging by the murmurs of agreement around me, he might not have to do it alone. By the next morning, the neighborhood felt different. Not in the way a storm changes the air, but in the way a slow leak changes a house, quiet, steady, and almost invisible, until it's everywhere. The HOA Facebook page was buzzing. Posts popped up like weeds. Finally taking action. About time someone fixed the problem. Change is coming. No one mentioned names, but I didn't have to guess who the problem was. Our little group of exempt houses had gone from invisible to infamous overnight. One neighbor, someone I'd shared holiday cookies with, posted a photo of our street, zoomed in on a single untrimmed shrub like it was proof of criminal neglect. Others chimed in with exaggerated complaints, each one dripping with the same smug satisfaction. See? This is why they need rules. The old man was in his element. He replied to every post, fanning the flames without ever saying outright that it was us. But everyone knew. And it wasn't just online. At the mailbox, people I'd chatted with for years suddenly kept their eyes on the ground. Some wouldn't even wave. Others smiled too much, the kind of smile you give when you're already plotting your next move. I told myself it was just noise. That people get riled up online, then go back to their lives. But 2 days later I saw something that made my blood run cold. A board member, the same one who'd once told me, "You're safe. They can't make you join," was standing in the old man's driveway. They were talking quietly, leaning in close. And then, the board member handed him a manila envelope. The old man tucked it under his arm without even glancing inside. But as they shook hands, I saw the look on his face. It wasn't the satisfaction of winning a small battle. It was the certainty of someone who knew the war was already his to lose or win. And for the first time since this started, I wondered if the fight was already over, and we were the only ones who didn't know it. I thought this was just one bitter neighbor with too much time on his hands, until I saw the board's envelope. That's when I realized I wasn't just fighting him. I might be fighting the HOA itself. I couldn't shake the image of that envelope. All night, it sat in the back of my mind like an unanswered question. What could be in there that needed to be passed in person, away from the HOA meetings and public posts? By morning, my curiosity had sharpened into something else, resolve. I started making calls. Not to the other exempt homeowners, not yet. I went to the one person in the neighborhood who still talked to everyone. The retired mail carrier who'd lived here since the first houses went up. She didn't even blink when I mentioned the envelope. "Oh, that wasn't the first one," she said. "I've seen him get hand-delivered stuff from the board before. Never through the regular mail. Always from someone who looks like they're trying not to be seen." That was when she leaned in, her voice low. "You didn't hear it from me, but I think he's got copies of old covenants. The ones that were never filed when your builder backed out." The implication hit me like a punch. If he had those documents, or even pieces of them, he might be trying to rewrite history. To make it look like we'd always been under the HOA's authority. I went home, my head spinning. It sounded insane, but not impossible. And if he was that determined, it meant he wasn't just hoping for signatures, he was building a legal weapon. That night I took a risk. I reached out to one of the quieter board members, someone I'd known before all this started. I didn't ask directly about the envelope. I just asked if anything official was being done about the exemptions. There was a pause, long enough to make my skin prickle. Then she said, "If I were you, I'd get ready. He's got help in places you wouldn't expect." She hung up before I could ask anything else. And suddenly it wasn't just the old man I was up against. It was the possibility that the HOA itself, or at least a part of it, was ready to rewrite the rules, no matter how far they had to bend the truth. It all came to a head at the next HOA meeting. This time I didn't sit in the back. I wanted to see his face. The old man walked in like he owned the place, envelope in hand, followed by 3 board members who looked like they'd been waiting for this moment as much as he had. The rest of the room was packed, not just with HOA members, but with curious neighbors from our exempt row, their arms folded tight. He didn't waste time. He slapped a stack of papers on the table and began his speech, all charm and false humility. "We've found historical documents," he said, holding up the top page. "Evidence that the original intent was for all homes to be part of this community association. Some clerical oversight kept a few properties out, but today we can correct that mistake." There it was, the lie wrapped in legal language. The clerical oversight was no oversight at all. It was the deal we'd bought our homes under, the protection we'd counted on for years. But here he was, rewriting the story in real time. Murmurs spread through the room. Some nodded in agreement, their eyes fixed on the words original intent. Others shifted uncomfortably. The old man noticed and leaned in. "This is about fairness," he said, his voice rising. "We can't have 2 sets of rules in one neighborhood. We must all contribute equally. This vote is about unity." Unity. The word tasted sour. I could feel the heat rising in my chest. Every instinct told me to stand up, to shout the truth, to call his bluff in front of everyone. But part of me hesitated, because if I spoke without proof, he'd twist it into exactly what he wanted. A picture of the special treatment he'd been rallying against. Then I caught the eye of the quieter board member, the one who'd warned me. She didn't say a word, but she gave the smallest nod toward her folder. And in that instant I knew, she had something. Something that could tear his argument apart. The question was, would she hand it over before the vote? The vote was minutes away when she finally slid the folder across the table. No words, no glance, just a silent handoff. My heart pounded as I opened it, scanning page after page. There they were, the original filings from when our builder backed out. Clear, dated and signed. Not just proof we'd been excluded from the HOA, but proof the association itself had acknowledged it, in writing. I didn't wait for permission. I stood, holding the pages high. "These," I said, my voice louder than I'd planned, "are the real historical documents. And they say the exact opposite of what you've been telling everyone." A ripple of noise swept the room. The old man's face tightened, but he forced a smile. "You can't just—" I cut him off. "You've been trying to rewrite history. This isn't about fairness or unity or property values. This is about dragging people into misery just because you can't stand to see them free." That last word, free, hit like a spark in dry grass. The exempt homeowners sat straighter. Even a few HOA members shifted in their seats, suddenly unsure. The board president took the papers, flipping through them in silence. Finally she looked up. "This changes everything. We can't move forward on this vote." The old man tried again, his voice rising, but the momentum was gone. People were talking now, not about signing his petition but about how far he'd gone to get what he wanted. Some were angry. Others embarrassed they'd been part of it. When the meeting adjourned, he left without looking at anyone. The envelope he'd brought was still on the table, unopened, forgotten. Walking out into the cool night air, I felt the knot in my chest loosen. The fight wasn't pretty, but it was over. We were still free. And maybe that was the real reason he hated us all along, not because we'd done anything wrong, but because freedom once seen is impossible to unsee, and it makes the walls of a cage feel that much smaller to those still inside. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next jaw-dropping tale. Got a crazy HOA story of your own? Drop it in the comments, we might feature it in an upcoming video. Until next time, remember, Sometimes the best revenge is served with a property deed.